My sister texted me at 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. Riley, change of plans. David's family doesn't want you at the wedding. Too much drama potential. Hope you understand. Love you. 3 sentences. 18 months of wedding planning erased by 3 sentences delivered while I sat in my apartment grading papers, wearing my old Cornell sweatshirt, believing I still had a sister who wanted me standing beside her on the most important day of her life. I'm Riley Palmer, 29, high school history teacher in Hartford, Connecticut, the older sister, the responsible one. The one who'd been planning Chloe's bridal shower, organizing her engagement party, and quietly financing half her wedding expenses because teaching kindergarten at a private school pays exactly what you'd expect. Chloe Palmer, soon to be Morrison, was getting married in 6 days to David Morrison, heir to a construction fortune and owner of the kind of entitled smile that made my teeth ache. Their wedding was the social event of the season in our small Connecticut town, 300 guests, country club venue, photographer flown in from Manhattan, and I was no longer invited. My phone buzzed again. Another text, Mom and Dad know. They agree it's for the best. Wedding stress is making everyone crazy. You'll thank me later. I stared at those words until they blurred, then I called our parents. Sweetheart, Mom's voice was carefully controlled. Chloe's just overwrought. You know how she gets when she's anxious. She uninvited me from her wedding, Mom, via text message. It's complicated, Dad's voice joined, apparently having picked up the extension. David's mother has some concerns about what? Silence stretched across the phone line like a rubber band about to snap. You've been very vocal about your reservations regarding David, Mom said finally. And with the Morrisons paying for most of the wedding, I'm being uninvited because I said David was controlling? You called him manipulative at the engagement party, Dad corrected, in front of his business partners. Because he is manipulative, and now he's manipulating Chloe into excluding her own sister. Riley, please try to see this from. I hung up. My apartment felt different suddenly. Smaller. The wedding invitation I'd magneted to my refrigerator, elegant cream cardstock with gold embossing, mocked me from across the kitchen. All those years of being the good daughter, the reliable sister, the one who fixed problems instead of creating them, and this was my reward. I pulled the invitation down and stared at my name written in Chloe's careful script, Miss Riley Palmer and guest. She'd written it herself weeks ago, promising me I could bring whoever I wanted. You're my sister, she'd said. You get whatever you need. Apparently, sisterhood had an expiration date. The memories came flooding back as I sat in my kitchen at midnight, the wedding invitation torn in pieces on my counter. Years of pattern recognition I'd been too loyal to acknowledge. Chloe's high school graduation, where I'd driven 3 hours from college to watch her walk across the stage, only to spend the entire party listening to relatives praise her artistic spirit while my academic achievements went unmentioned. Chloe's college fund crisis, when she'd spent her sophomore yearbook money on a spring break trip to Cancun and I'd quietly transferred $2,000 from my graduate school savings to cover her expenses. Chloe's first apartment, which I'd helped her furnish, clean, and organize while she flitted between yoga classes and coffee dates. Always the sister in the background. Always the problem solver. Always second to whatever crisis or celebration Chloe had created. My phone rang at 7 a.m. the next morning. Chloe, Riley, we need to talk. Do we? Because your text seemed pretty definitive. Can you come over, please? This is all such a mess. Against my better judgment, I drove to the apartment I'd helped her decorate, using the spare key she'd given me for emergencies. I found her on her couch in pajamas, surrounded by wedding magazines and tissues. David's mother thinks you're going to cause problems, she said without preamble. She's convinced you'll object during the ceremony or make a scene. Based on what evidence? You haven't exactly been supportive. Her voice carried that familiar edge of defensiveness mixed with accusation. You've questioned every decision we've made. I questioned David's demand that you quit your job. I questioned his insistence on controlling your bank account. I questioned why he speaks to you like you're a child. He's protective. He's possessive, Chloe. There's a difference. She stood up, pacing to the window. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't just be happy for me. I've planned your engagement party, organized your bridal shower, and spent 18 months listening to wedding details. How is that not supportive? You've been judging us the entire time. The accusation hung between us like a challenge. Maybe I had been judging. Maybe watching my bright, creative sister systematically dimming herself to fit David's expectations had made me vocal about concerns that weren't welcome. So your solution is to exclude me completely? David's family is paying for everything, Riley. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. If his mother wants a guest list without drama potential, that's her call to make. I'm not a guest, Chloe, I'm your sister. You're my sister who's been negative about my relationship for 2 years. I looked around the apartment I'd helped create, the bookshelf I'd assembled, the curtains I'd helped hang, the coffee table I'd driven 2 towns over to find at her specific request, physical evidence of years of sisterly support being reframed as inadequacy. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, you're right, you and David should have exactly the wedding you want with exactly the people who support your decisions. I respect that choice. Chloe's expression shifted from defensive to confused. She'd clearly expected more fight, more pleading, more of the pattern where I bent myself into whatever shape was needed to maintain peace. So you understand? I understand perfectly. I left without another word, driving home in a strange state of clarity. For the first time in our relationship, I wasn't going to be the sister who accommodated, who compromised, who sacrificed my dignity to preserve family harmony. I spent the afternoon on my laptop researching 6 days to plan a response that would honor my own worth instead of begging for inclusion where I wasn't wanted. That night, I booked a solo trip to Scotland, 7 days across cold cliffs and ancient castles, flying out the morning of Chloe's wedding. The flight wasn't cheap, but I used the money I'd saved for her wedding gift, a house fund she no longer deserved. My parents didn't take it well. Mom called immediately, pleading, "What if she changes her mind?" I told her I was just making space. Respecting Chloe's decision by removing the drama she feared, she said I was being spiteful. I said I was finally practicing self-care. The next few days were a chorus of pressure, calls, texts, guilt. Chloe said I was punishing her. I told her I was setting boundaries. That didn't go over well. Then Mom showed up with wine and her serious talk face. She spoke of sisterhood, maturity, and swallowing pride for one day. But I'd already swallowed too much. She said Chloe was always emotional, I was the strong one. I asked her if she meant I'd simply been trained to accept less. She didn't answer. We talked until nearly midnight, the conversation cycling through years of family patterns neither of us had questioned before. Mom's growing discomfort with my questions suggested I wasn't the only one beginning to recognize problematic dynamics. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "I want you to support my decision to prioritize my own well-being for once." She left without making any commitments, but something in her expression suggested my words had found their mark. 3 days before the wedding and my departure, Chloe made one final attempt at reconciliation. She appeared at my school after hours, catching me as I loaded papers into my car. "Riley, please, I miss you. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. Has it, or has it just forced us to be honest about what our relationship actually looks like? You're my sister, you're supposed to stand beside me no matter what. And you're supposed to want me there, but you don't. You want the version of me who agrees with every decision and never voices concerns. That sister doesn't exist anymore." She started crying then, the kind of tears that had always made me fold in the past. This time I felt only sadness for both of us, for the relationship we'd pretended to have versus the one that actually existed. "I can't change my mind now," she whispered. "David's family would never understand. I know, and I can't pretend this doesn't hurt to spare everyone else's comfort." We stood in the empty parking lot of my school, separated by more than physical distance. Two sisters who'd grown up in the same house but learned completely different lessons about love, loyalty, and self-worth. "Have a beautiful wedding, Chloe. I hope it's everything you dreamed of." I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing alone under the parking lot lights. The next morning, I boarded a plane to Edinburgh, my phone turned off and stored in my carry-on bag. For the first time in 29 years, I was prioritizing my own needs without considering the convenience of my family. The relief was profound and terrifying. Scotland was everything I'd needed it to be: vast landscapes that made my problems feel appropriately small, ancient castles that reminded me how brief human drama really was, and the kind of solitude that allowed real thinking instead of reactive feeling. I hiked through the Highlands, explored Edinburgh's old town, and spent evenings writing in my journal about patterns I was finally brave enough to examine. The woman who'd boarded the plane in Hartford was different from the one walking through Scottish moors, and the difference felt like freedom. On what should have been Chloe's wedding day, I climbed Arthur's Seat at dawn and watched the sun rise over Edinburgh. No photos for social media, no documentation for others, just a moment of peace in a landscape that owed me nothing and expected nothing in return. I kept my phone turned off for the entire trip, just as I'd planned. Whatever wedding drama was unfolding at home could wait until I was ready to face it with new boundaries intact. The trip back to Hartford felt like traveling between two different worlds. As my plane descended, I could see the familiar landmarks of home, but I felt like a tourist returning to a country whose customs no longer made sense to me. I turned my phone back on in the airport and immediately regretted it. 37 missed calls, 52 text messages, voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. I found a quiet corner of the baggage claim area and started reading messages, my confusion growing with each one. "Mom, Riley, call home immediately, emergency." "Dad, where are you? We need to talk ASAP." "Chloe, please come home." "Everything's ruined." My high school friend Sarah, "Holy shit, Riley, your sister's wedding was a disaster. Call me when you land." Even my principal had texted, "Hope your trip was restorative. There's been some family situation everyone's talking about. Take Monday off if you need it." Everyone's talking about it. What had happened? I called my parents from the taxi, my stomach churning with anxiety and curiosity. "Riley." Mom's voice was sharp with relief and stress. "Thank God, where have you been? We've been calling for days." "I told you I was going to Scotland. What happened?" "The wedding," Mom's voice broke. "Oh, honey, it was horrible, horrible." Dad took over the call. "David left Chloe at the altar, sweetheart. Literally left her standing there in front of 300 people." The taxi driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, obviously overhearing. I asked him to turn up the radio and lower my voice. He left her. During the ceremony, right after the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, David just stopped everything, said he couldn't go through with it because he wasn't sure about Chloe's commitment to their relationship. What does that mean? Apparently, he'd heard about your conversation with Chloe, about his controlling behavior. He decided that if his fiance's own sister could see red flags in his personality, maybe Chloe wasn't as committed as she claimed. The irony was breathtaking. David had demanded my exclusion to prevent drama, then created the ultimate dramatic scene by canceling his own wedding based on concerns about my concerns. Where's Chloe now? At home with us, she's not doing well, Riley. She keeps asking for you. Asking for me? She says you were right about David all along. She wants to apologize, wants to explain. Mom, I need to go home and process this. I'll come over tomorrow. Tonight, honey, please. She needs tomorrow, I repeated firmly. I need time to think. That evening, alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and a glass of wine, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Chloe's perfect wedding had imploded because the groom couldn't handle the possibility that his relationship wasn't as solid as he'd believed. The sister who'd been excluded for negativity was now being summoned to provide comfort in the aftermath. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd been right about David's character, his dramatic wedding exit proved that, but mostly I felt sad for Chloe and wary of being pulled back into old patterns just because she was in crisis. I slept poorly and woke to find my mother in my kitchen. How did you get in here? You gave me a spare key, remember, for emergencies. She was making coffee as if she lived there, clearly settling in for a serious conversation. I was still in pajamas, disheveled from travel and poor sleep, while she looked perfectly put together despite the family crisis. This feels like an emergency to me, she continued. Your sister is devastated. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. She won't talk to anyone except to ask when you're coming home. I am home. You know what I mean. When are you coming to see her? I poured myself coffee and sat across from her at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd graded papers the night I received Chloe's wedding exclusion text. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'll see Chloe when I'm ready to see her, not before. She's your sister, Rayleigh. She's in pain. She's been in pain before. She'll survive. My mother's expression shifted from pleading to shocked. That's cruel. What's cruel is excluding your sister from your wedding, then expecting her to drop everything to comfort you when your poor decision-making has consequences. She admits she was wrong about the wedding invitation. She admits it now that she needs something from me. We stared at each other across my kitchen table, and I could see my mother struggling to understand this version of me. The daughter who'd always accommodated was refusing to bend. What's happened to you? I've learned to value myself. This isn't you, Riley. You're not selfish like this. If setting boundaries makes me selfish, then I guess I'm selfish now. My mother left without achieving her objective, but she delivered the message clearly. My family needed me to return to my old role as problem solver and comforter. They needed me to forget about my own hurt to manage Chloe's crisis. I wasn't going to do it. That afternoon brought a parade of visitors. First, my father, gentler than my mother, but delivering the same basic message about family obligations and forgiveness. Then Chloe's best friend Amanda, assigned to guilt-trip me about sisterly duty and unconditional love. She's been through enough, Amanda insisted, standing in my doorway with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned their place in Chloe's life. She doesn't need judgment from her own sister. I'm not judging her, I'm protecting myself. From what? She's already been humiliated publicly. What more punishment does she need? This isn't about punishment, it's about recognition that our relationship needs to change. Amanda left frustrated, clearly having expected easier success with the reasonable sister. As evening approached, I prepared for the inevitable final assault, Chloe herself. She arrived just after sunset, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. No makeup, hair in a messy ponytail, wearing the kind of comfortable clothes that suggested she'd given up on appearances entirely. Riley, she said simply, and started crying. The old me would have opened my arms immediately, would have ushered her inside and focused entirely on comfort. The new me recognized this as a manipulation tactic I'd fallen for countless times before. What do you need, Chloe? I need my sister. Your sister is right here, but she's not the same person who accepted being uninvited from your wedding. We stood in my doorway, separated by more than the threshold. Chloe's tears weren't moving me the way they always had before. Can I come in, please? I stepped aside but maintained physical and emotional distance as she settled onto my couch, the same couch where our mother had lectured me about family obligations just days earlier. You were right about David, she began, about everything. I know. He said horrible things during the ceremony, in front of everyone. About how I was disloyal for not defending him against my family's concerns. I'm sorry that happened to you. Are you, really? Because you seem pretty calm for someone whose sister just had her life destroyed. The accusation in her voice surprised me. Even in crisis, even seeking my comfort, she was finding ways to make me responsible for her emotions. I'm calm because your wedding drama isn't my emergency to fix. It's not drama, Riley, it's my life falling apart. Your life fell apart because you ignored red flags about someone's character and prioritized appearance over substance. Those were your choices. She stared at me as if I'd become a stranger. You've changed. I've learned to stop enabling your chaos. Enabling, I need support, not judgment. You need to learn that actions have consequences. You excluded me from your life when it was convenient, and now you want me to rescue you when it's convenient? That's not how relationships work anymore. Chloe's tears increased, but I felt only resolve. This was exactly the pattern I'd traveled to Scotland to break. I'm sorry about the wedding invitation, she sobbed. I was wrong. I should have stood up to David and his family. Yes, you should have, so you forgive me. Forgiveness and returning to old patterns are different things, Chloe. She looked up at me with confusion and growing anger. What does that mean? It means I forgive you for hurting me, but I won't pretend it didn't happen. Our relationship needs to change if it's going to continue. Change how? You need to take responsibility for your own problems instead of expecting me to fix them. You need to consider my feelings instead of just demanding my support, and you need to accept that I won't be available for every crisis you create. The conversation continued for 2 hours, cycling through tears, anger, accusations, and conditional apologies. By the end, Chloe had revealed the depth of her entitlement. She genuinely believed that my forgiveness should translate into immediate return to my caretaking role. Fine, she said finally, standing to leave. Be alone then, see how that works out for you. I've been alone for the past week, it's worked out beautifully. She left without another word, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat in the silence that followed, feeling something I'd never experienced after a fight with my sister, peace. For the first time in our relationship, I'd held my ground completely. I'd offered neither false comfort nor false accommodation. I'd been honest about my needs and boundaries, and I'd maintained them despite family pressure. It felt like victory. The next few weeks brought a campaign of family pressure unlike anything I'd experienced. My parents called daily, oscillating between guilt, Chloe needs you, and anger, you're being vindictive. Extended relatives weighed in through Facebook messages and concerned phone calls. Even my grandmother got involved, delivering a lecture about sisterly duty that would have devastated the old me. But I'd found something in Scotland that made me immune to their manipulations: self-respect. I maintained my boundaries consistently. I was polite but firm with family members who demanded I fix things with Chloe. I refused to take responsibility for her emotional state or her social embarrassment, and most importantly, I stopped explaining myself. Riley's going through a selfish phase, I heard through the family grapevine. She's forgotten what family means. Maybe I was going through a selfish phase, maybe I had forgotten what family meant to them. But I'd learned what family should mean to me: mutual respect, genuine support, and relationships based on choice rather than obligation. Chloe tried various approaches to regain my caretaking services: anger, tears, mutual friends delivering messages, even showing up at my school during parent-teacher conferences. Each attempt was met with the same response: I was available for a genuine relationship, but not for the old patterns. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after her failed wedding, when Chloe appeared at my apartment looking different, not smaller or more fragile, but more solid somehow. She carried herself with a dignity I hadn't seen since high school. I've been thinking, she said when I answered the door, about what you said about our relationship needing to change. And I think you're right, I think I've been using you. This time, I invited her in. We sat across from each other in my living room, but the dynamic felt different, less desperate, more honest. I've always known you'd fix things for me, she continued. It was easier than learning to fix things myself. Why are you telling me this now? Because David's rejection forced me to look at myself honestly for the first time, and I didn't like what I saw. We talked for 3 hours, the longest honest conversation we'd ever had. Chloe admitted to patterns I'd been too loyal to name: emotional manipulation, financial dependence, expecting unconditional support while offering conditional love in return. I was terrified you'd abandon me if I couldn't be perfect, she said, so I made sure you'd feel guilty for leaving. And when that stopped working, I got angry because losing control over you meant losing control over my safety net. For the first time in our adult relationship, Chloe took full responsibility for her choices without deflecting blame or seeking immediate comfort. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't promise to change. She simply acknowledged reality. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. I'd like to try building a real relationship with you, but I understand if you're not interested. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I'd never met before: not the charismatic but dependent younger sister, and not the victim of romantic disappointment, but an adult woman capable of growth and change. I'm interested, I said carefully, but it has to be different. I know. We established new ground rules that day. Chloe would stop expecting me to solve her problems. I would stop accepting responsibility for her emotions. We would both practice asking for support rather than demanding it, and offering it rather than assuming it was owed. The changes weren't immediate or easy. Old patterns resurged during times of stress. But we both caught ourselves more quickly, apologized more genuinely, and chose growth over comfort more consistently. My parents struggled longer with the new family dynamics. They'd built their parenting around accommodating Chloe's needs and expecting my compliance. When both daughters began setting boundaries, they had to examine their own roles in creating unhealthy patterns. We made you responsible for your sister's happiness, Dad admitted during a family dinner 6 months after the wedding crisis. That wasn't fair to either of you. We thought we were helping Chloe by giving her extra support, Mom added. But we were actually preventing her from developing coping skills. The recognition felt like vindication, but more importantly, it felt like hope for genuine change. Chloe began therapy to address her pattern of creating chaos when life felt too stable. She also started dating again cautiously, with attention to red flags she'd previously ignored. The first time she asked for my opinion about a new relationship, she genuinely listened to my concerns rather than becoming defensive. I maintained my boundaries about being the family fixer, but I also relaxed into enjoying relationships that no longer felt exploitative. When Chloe needed support, she asked clearly and accepted my limits gracefully. When I needed support, she offered it without conditions or scorekeeping. The transformation wasn't dramatic or Hollywood perfect. There were setbacks, difficult conversations, and moments when old patterns felt easier than new growth. But slowly, authentically, we built something healthier than what we'd inherited. 2 years after her canceled wedding, Chloe got engaged again to a kindergarten teacher named Marcus who treated her as an equal partner rather than a beautiful accessory. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, the invitation came with genuine desire for my presence rather than family obligation. Are you sure? I asked. Last time didn't work out so well. Last time I wasn't ready to be married, she replied. This time I know the difference between a wedding and a marriage. I stood beside my sister at her second wedding, wearing a dress I'd chosen myself, in a ceremony that celebrated love rather than status. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, I caught Chloe's eye and smiled. No objections. Only joy for a woman who'd learned to value herself enough to choose a partner who valued her too. The reception was small, 50 people who genuinely cared about the couple rather than hundreds gathered for social appearances. During her speech, Chloe thanked me not for being the perfect sister, but for being honest enough to demand better for both of us. Riley taught me that love isn't about fixing each other, she said, raising her glass in my direction. It's about growing together. As I watched my sister dance with her new husband, a man who looked at her with genuine affection rather than possessive pride, I felt profound gratitude for the crisis that had forced us all to change. The wedding that never happened had been the best thing that could have happened to our family. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to enable their weakness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries that force growth. And sometimes the person you save by standing up for yourself is not just yourself, but everyone around you. I learned in Scotland that I was worth fighting for. I learned at home that fighting for myself could save relationships rather than destroy them. The sister who'd been excluded from one wedding because she spoke the truth became the maid of honor at another because she'd refused to stop speaking it. That night, driving home from Chloe's reception, I thought about the woman who'd boarded a plane to Edinburgh 2 years earlier, hurt, angry, and desperate to escape family expectations. She'd been looking for peace. What she'd found was power: the power to demand respect, the power to maintain boundaries, and the power to build relationships based on choice rather than obligation. The road ahead looked different when you traveled it with dignity intact. The family in my rearview mirror looked different when they'd learned to see you as a person rather than a function. Blood doesn't bind you to accept less than you deserve. Love doesn't require you to silence yourself for others' comfort. And sometimes the most family-like thing you can do is refuse to participate in patterns that diminish everyone involved. I drove through the Connecticut countryside toward my own apartment, my own life, my own choices, and felt the deep satisfaction of a woman who'd learned to save herself first. The rest, the healing, the growth, the genuine love, had followed naturally. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic reconciliations. This one ended with something better: authentic relationships built on mutual respect and the quiet strength of boundaries maintained with love.